Hi, I'm Diane Stepro here at Jeffersonville Township Public Library. Today, we're talking to Ethan Holmes, who is an economist. Ethan, could you tell us a little bit about your job as it relates to energy resiliency?
Absolutely. I work for Baltimore Gas and Electric as a principal strategy analyst in the Utility of the Future group. And we are concerned with what's called grid modernization, which involves the issues of electrification and resiliency, basically increasing the amount of clean energy on the grid, as well as making the grid more resilient, which we'll talk about more.
Okay. And I just want to add that Mr. Holmes helped us a great deal with understanding what we were doing when we were writing the grant that we're going to be talking about later. And that's one reason why he is with us today. At the onset, I really did not know what we were being asked to do when we were asked to do something to promote energy resilience. But I'm going to be asking Mr. Holmes a number of questions about energy resilience and hoping that by the end of it, the audience understands the term. And then after that portion of the program concludes, I'm going to be talking about our grant project a little bit. So
one small disclaimer. I do have to say that I am not here representing my employer. These are my views and represent my career in my 25 years in climate change and energy policy.
Okay. Could you tell us just a little bit more about your career?
I started out in college working in a climate advocacy group that was represented at the UN. I moved on to working for what's called deregulation, the breaking up of utilities and making a larger wholesale markets that where energy is traded, and the local utilities now in most cases don't do own their own generation. The generation is separate from the distribution of the energy. These have been evolving over the years, and then eventually I moved into grid modernization in the past 5 years, which is becoming the new cutting edge issue.
So just for the audience, before we move on, I want to make sure when you talk about generation, you're talking about the energy, like say a solar farm is not going to be owned by the company that delivers the energy to your house.
In many cases, and it's different throughout the U.S. We have a very a wide range of market structures in the U.S. right now, but in many cases, especially where we are both in areas that are deregulated, local utilities sold their generation off and just became wires companies, as we call it. And then the generation companies were separate, and that was, the idea was to both lower prices for consumers by creating more of a market incentives, and this actually to allow more green energy on the grid by allowing renewable energy to compete in these wholesale markets, which is something that I was a part of helping design, and is, we're moving up to around 12% penetration right now, which is a huge gain from where we were 20 years ago.
Somebody who owns a wind farm can sell the energy to a wires company to deliver it to homes, and could be competing with another wind farm or
they could do it that way, and that would be through a straight purchase agreement. But many of them just bid into a large market, for instance, which a wholesale energy market, where they then create a queue based on the prices, and the lowest price gets dispatched first. And then you go down until all of the energy needs of the area have been met.
So
it's a complex area, though, and probably not one we want to go too deep into.
No, I didn't really get into that, but I wanted to understand, wanted people to understand how that makes energy cheaper to spread that out. So to get into the actual questions that I wanted to talk to you about today, could you define energy resilience?
Not easily. And I love that this was the first question. This is right now, the Institute for Electrical and Electronics Engineers, the national labs, and many other groups are developing definitions and metrics to define and measure resiliency, but it's not an easy task. In the electric industry, for instance, we define reliability in terms of outage frequency, how often your lights go off, and the duration of that outage, how long that your lights are off. But energy resilience can mean resisting major weather events and flooding events and other events like that, as well as how it can also mean how rapidly you stand your system back up after. Both of those involve things that you can't define. Would my system necessarily have resisted this event? You can't know. You also can't know what the actual full outage would have been without the resiliency investments that you've made. So it's a very hard term to define. And then there's the fact that resiliency means different things at different levels. For instance, at the national level, it means energy security, cyber security, preventing malicious hacking attacks on the energy system. Corporations have that too. Locally, it could mean the ability to resist, as we said, a weather event like a derecho or a tornado, a flooding event, or stand up quickly after major weather events. Or locally, it can even mean the ability to maintain your power independently of the macro grid, the national grid. The state of Indiana, a large of it may have a major outage, but pockets of it could have power being supplied locally using resiliency measures. So resiliency means a lot of things, and that's we'll get into more of this later, but all the elements come together in a great way, in my opinion. And anyway, let's move on.
How is it different from energy conservation? Resiliency and conservation, they're not the same thing, but they are related?
I would say that conservation efforts like energy efficiency, any reduction in energy use helps with resiliency. It makes you more energy independent. The less energy you need, the easier it is to maintain power. So it's an element of like many things.
Okay. And does energy resiliency have financial implications?
Huge financial implications. And that's one of the things the world is struggling with right now. I think, when you look at things like Russian cyber attacks on Ukraine over the past 5-6 years, when you think about German dependence on Russian natural gas in the middle of what's going on in Europe right now, when you think about the costs at the pump, how it directly impacts consumers right now, and then on a greater level, what would happen when a major event happens that wipes out energy and the impact that has on businesses. A 10-day outage in an area caused by a major weather event is going to stress local resources. Fuel will run out. People are going to have difficulty getting a hold of fresh water. Refrigeration is going to fail. Food will go bad. The implications are at every level. Maintaining energy is one of the most important things. Keeping people's power on is one of the most important things in our world right now to maintain what we have become. Right now, we're talking where you and I are communicating across several hundred miles. These communications would fail without resiliency. We would not be able to talk. No, we aren't prepared right now to go back to a 1920s level of localized production, localized communication. And that's why resiliency is such a huge issue.
I don't think I mentioned earlier that you are actually coming to us via Zoom through Zoom from the DC Metro, Washington DC Metro. So and we're here in Indiana. What do alternative energy sources like solar and wind energy have to do with resilience?
A great deal. And at the macro level, the national level, the more renewable energy you have on your system, the less you're dependent on on fossil fuels, the less you're dependent on foreign fossil fuels, the imports. That is hugely important. And then at the local level, again, when I've mentioned that resiliency at the local level is the ability to keep the lights on even if the macro grid goes down, wind and solar can be a very localized form of production. A group of houses all with solar on them will do much better during a major storm, after a major storm event, than a group of houses without them. They will be able to turn on their AC for a certain amount of time during the day. They'll have, their refrigerators will stay on. Their food will be good. And it also means the supporting emergency services. The ability to keep emergency services running during an event is a huge issue right now. We've seen the California wildfires cutting off fuel to areas, resulting in people being in need and emergency services not having the kind of fuel and access to energy that they need to go serve people as well as they could otherwise. Resiliency plays in so many parts of our lives right now, and is, that's why it's a huge issue.
Are there other non-fossil fuels we should be aware of that fit into energy resilience?
Right off the top of my head, geothermal and tidal are both. Tidal, yeah. The tides move in, the waves move out. You can create generation through there. Yeah, that's one area that we're having that works very well. Geothermal, digging down into the earth, taking advantage either of heat coming from the earth, or even just the fact that once you get down to a certain depth, you get a constant temperature, and that constant temperature can be used to raise the temperature of very cold air, making it better in the winter, or lower the temperature of very hot air for the summer. It can be used that way too. And just by changing the temperature of the air, it makes it easier to heat or cool it further to human comfort level. Geothermal is huge. But, in my work right now in grid modernization, where it's a very emergent field, we are seeing new technologies every day. The big, for instance, I like to give from my experience was around 2008. I was working at an energy advocacy group, and my boss encouraged me to always take pitches. When people come in wanting to talk about their new technology, promote it, go ahead and listen. Just take 30 minutes out of your day. And some gentlemen came in and wanted to talk to us about these lithium-ion batteries for large-scale storage. Today, those lithium-ion batteries are very common. They're used at the utility scale for large storage projects that can maintain energy, even if the local energy distribution system can't work, or the transmission system isn't transporting energy. You have energy on site. You can have these lithium-ion batteries on your homes and your businesses, maintain your household energy. And of course, they're also the power source behind, or the storage source behind, the new generation of electric vehicles we're seeing out on the market now. And in 2008, that was a pitch I heard, and now it's huge.
Wow. So the next question ties right into that. How about vehicles that run on multiple types of fuel, like the Ford Escape Hybrid the library is about to purchase? How do they fit into energy resilience?
Well, two ways. First, of course, by being partially electric, they do reduce the use of fossil fuels, create energy resilience that way. But also, this brings out one of the great tensions in resiliency policy, because people think resiliency policy does involve a lot of climate change mitigation and prevention. However, the ability to switch between fuel sources also is a form of resiliency. And so in many cases, the ability to use either straight electric or switch over to a fossil base is a form of resiliency. And you can see that. And when, for instance, when Texas is having its power outages, people with generators on their homes can turn on their generator and power their house. And that generator, though, runs on gasoline. So there's a trade-off there. So resiliency can't, and that is one of the huge tensions in the world of resiliency policy today, and one of the ones I find very vexing.
Well, yeah, we found it very vexing when we found we could not use a completely electric vehicle and expect to charge up in a reasonable space of distance if we took long trips. So, yeah.
And the distance problem is one they're working on. That's why there's a lot of movement out there to get more chargers. There's a lot of different program amount of fast chargers, and just make them more ubiquitous in people's lives. One of the, I think, the biggest focuses is realizing that people generally only drive to their home and their office and a few other places. And so making sure that chargers are in the places that people go most often, encouraging people to charge at their home overnight. Park your car, go to bed, wake up in the morning, get charged up and ready to go, drive to your office. There's a charger in your parking space at your office, quick charge there, go back home. That's the kind of thing where people are trying to encourage, is chargers at places where people need them, as well as out in the greater highway system, so that people can get more distance out of the EV.
The library,
electric vehicle.
oh, yeah, sorry. I should have asked what that was. Yeah. I knew because I've done this grant, but the library is considering applying for a grant for solar panels. A lot of people worry about solar and wind energy becoming unavailable on cloudy, still days, or even more at night. Is there a technology that can solve that problem? I've also heard people express concerns about birds flying into solar panels or wind turbines. And could you address at the same time if that's a valid concern?
Let's start with first. Let's talk about intermittency. That's how solar and wind come and go based on wind speeds and the availability of sunlight. Solar panel technology is getting better. Solar panel technology is even getting to the point where it's sensitive enough to pull in starlight, moonlight, keeping a certain amount of energy being generated, pardon the cat. Still flowing even when the conditions are dim. But also intermittency, there are ways to fixing intermittency. And one of my favorite studies I read, IEEE, that's the Institute of Electric and Electronics Engineers, did a study in the late 2000s where they started taking all of the production curves of all of these solar panels and wind generators, and think of them as they're sine waves, each kind of messy ones. And they found that the larger the area you aggregate them over, the more and more all those random signals become a line. And so intermittency at the macro level is mitigated simply by having more on your system. The more widespread it is, the more closer to just a straight generation line it will become, a constant. And especially when you start moving it towards across, like, the Midwest, for instance, if you were to aggregate from Missouri all the way to Ohio, you're going to get a lot of energy production. And despite the different times of days, or because of the different times of days across that area, you're going to get a much more solid line. At the local level, storage. It's always coming back to storage. Those lithium-ion batteries I was talking about, and there are also ways of turning the energy into heat or cold, chemical ways of storing it. I've even seen mechanical storage, where blocks are lifted up all day long and put on a tower, and then those blocks at night go back down and pull a turbine. One of the oldest forms of energy storage is a form of water storage that is used on where dams will actually pump water up into a tank much higher than the dam itself and you save that for later, release it when there's more need for energy. So, energy, mass and energy conservation still apply. You just have to change what the energy is into another form and store it that way, and then re-release it back onto the system at a time when it's needed most. So plenty of ways to deal with the intermittency problem, which is why I honestly, at this point in my career, do not consider intermittency a problem anymore. Intermittency is simply it's just a feature. It's just how renewables work.
It's something you have to plan for, like how to
Mhm.
move fuel, like how to move fossil fuels. But that
Exactly.
has to be planned. Okay.
Yeah. There's mitigation for everything, Always trade-offs. You mentioned I'm an economist. We always think in terms of trade-offs. I can deal with intermittency, or I can deal with emissions.
I was really taken by the statement that we can capture energy from starlight. That's pretty remarkable, because the stars are that energy is
It's a little tiny, but
yeah.
they're increasing the sensitivity.
Oh, Mr. Holmes, you have frozen.
Energy of
There we go.
the people, and turn that into energy. Stable.
Let me see if it's us. I don't think it's us. No, we're pretty well connected. You keep freezing, but I don't think we missed much. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
All right. We're getting close to the end. Does energy resilience have benefits for individuals, as not just the society as a whole?
Well, like I said, having your own generator, having your own solar, that increases your resiliency, which makes you not a part of a problem when a resiliency event happens. You're taken care of. You're one less person we need to make sure is receiving energy at that time. Of course, EVs bring the same things, local battery. And one of my favorite things to promote, one of the oldest technologies on Earth, is the tree. Incredibly effective at reducing energy consumption, creates shade, creates wind blocks, absorbs emissions. Super simple technology that I think more people need to be putting trees all around their homes, simply because it will reduce your energy needs and improve your life, really.
And the last question, are there any resources to help individuals who wish to learn more about energy resilience, or even seek funding for energy resilience projects in their homes, businesses, or communities?
Oh, yes. And, at the biggest level right now, the big news everyone's talking about is the infrastructure bill. Lots of grant money in there. I know many, many people who are poring over the details of the grant itself, of the bill itself, attending federal meetings with federal agencies where they're figuring out how they're going to execute what the bill directs them to. The funding is available for numerous types of groups through the infrastructure bill. There's also, Department of Energy is always a good place to look. They have great resources altogether about it. Also, you should be looking at your state and local energy agencies. Most states have some kind of an energy agency that has smaller scale grants that are focused on local needs. And check with your local utilities. Many utilities have various programs to help support people's resiliency needs. Though you will find that there are refund programs to incentivize people to buy solar panels, rebate programs, I should say, solar panels, storage, energy efficiency products. Numerous things like that are available through your local utilities if you look around. And finally, I highly recommend talking to your local librarian.
Okay, well, I think we can help people with that. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Holmes. If everybody else will hang on, we're going to say adieu to Mr. Holmes, and I'm going to tell you just a little bit about our grant program. Thank you very much.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. This has been really fun.
Great.
Bye.
Bye. Well, the library in the past couple of years has written a sustainability policy and is trying to improve our environmental impact and sustainability in general. And so we also needed a new car pretty desperately. So when this grant came across our director's desk from the Indiana Department of Energy Development, he asked me if I thought we could possibly write a grant and see if we could upgrade to something a little bit more environmentally friendly than the car we have now, which is not only not environmentally friendly, but doesn't really run very much. So we turned in the grant after doing some research. We found that in this area, in the Jeffersonville area, we can get electrical hookups to charge our car if we wanted to, but we decided against a completely electrical vehicle for the very reasons that you just heard, that having just one type of fuel leaves you with some problems. And we did see on maps of available public electrical charging stations that there are huge swaths of the United States where we could not travel with a completely electrical vehicle and expect to fuel up before we ran out of power. So we went with a hybrid, the Ford Escape, and we're awaiting delivery. As you probably have heard, there are many components in cars right now that are at a shortage, and that's another kind of resiliency issue besides energy. But we're waiting for ours because of the backlog of orders for cars. We hope to be able to take it to several local events so people can see it, and we can discuss how it's worked out for us. But we're hoping that we can lead the way in our community by bringing more energy resilience into the way that we conduct our library's business. And I'd like to thank everyone for listening in, and I hope you all have a great day. We're right at past, so I'm going to log out now. And please do call the library if you have any questions. And